you for coming. We are live today with Sherry. Really excited about you guys. You meet and chat with her. She's got a lot of books, a lot of different genres. So let me real quickly just introduce her, just in case you don't know her. USA Today bestselling author Sherry Thomas decided that her goal in life is to write every kind of book she enjoys. Thus far, she's published romance, fantasy, mystery, and a Wuji-inspired duology. I probably pronounced that wrong. Her books regularly receive starred reviews and Best of the Year honors from trade publications, including such outlets as the New York Times and National Public Radio. She is also a two-time winner of the Romance Writers of America's prestigious Rita Award. Sherry immigrated from China at age 13, and English is her second language. All right, I'm going to bring Sherry on. Hello. Hi. So glad to have you on here. Yes, I have so many things to say. And anybody who's watching, if you want to drop comments down below, feel free, and we will be able to answer those. I just finished reading A Study in Scarlet Women, and of course I read on my Kindle, but so you can see this, when it's not in black and white, this is a gorgeous cover. And if you haven't read it, it is the Lady Sherlock series, and we're going into book 6, I think. Is that right?
Book 6 has been published, with book 7 is coming out in 2 months.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're on book 7. I can't count. That's why I write romance novels. No, just kidding. So what's really interesting, I think, is that you have so many different books, and 2 of them actually you base on characters that are already written. One is Sherlock Holmes, but you also have a Mulan series, and I want to just bring up these graphics real quick so people can appreciate the diversity that you have in your catalog here. So you have the romances. You can see those very typical covers that are gorgeous. And then you have the mystery series, again, really easily to spot on here. And then the Magnolia Sword is a ballad of Mulan. I would love to talk about all those things. So what is it like? What's the process when you have a backstory that's already canon? How do you move through that?
Well, you move through that by first of all, if you are going to write a retelling, I'm hoping that you are personally a fan of retellings, as I am.
Yes.
I know it's kind of heretical to say this, but it's never stopped me from being honest about it, that I happen to be a bigger fan of certain Sherlock Holmes retelling, reimaginings, than I am of the original canon. Because I feel while the original canon was like really cool and startling and everything for its era, it is also very much of its era. And it's like very plot driven, and the characterization is both interesting and thin. So I have, always been like a much bigger fan, say, of the Laurie R. King's Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes stories than I am of the original. Like, I think I even liked when I was a like early preteen, like maybe 11 or 12 years old, and I was reading Sherlock Holmes translated into Chinese, those adventures of old-timey canon story. Right around the same time, I also read 7% Solution, which is one of the most famous works in the Sherlock Holmes pastiche. Basically, just pastiche is what the collective term they have for everybody who write Sherlock Holmes stories who aren't Arthur Conan Doyle. So I believe that book was published like either late 70s or early 80s, and it was like on the New York Times bestseller list for months and months. And when I read it, I was fully aware that it wasn't written by the original author. And I was also at the same time fully aware that I really like what it did with the story, because in the original books, his drug use was kind of just like an idiosyncrasy. Whereas in this, in the 7% Solution, they kind of went much more in depth into it. Like, if I remember correctly, and remember this was 30 years ago that I last. I think it was basically he was missing for those 3 years because he was in rehab. some dramatic events and all that, but I can't remember specific plot exactly, but I do remember loving that they took what is like kind of a minor thing in the original canon and made it major as you think it should be, and went in a totally different direction and explore things in a different way. I just really enjoy that, and so also as such, I think now I've calmed down a little bit, but used to be whenever there's like a Cinderella adaptation, I would watch it for the dress of it. It is nothing else.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody said my volume is going in and out again. Is it the case? Is it just because I am moving back and forth, or is it just?
I mean, I don't think it is. Is there a way to change, maybe take out the AirPod and then go to your computer microphone? Maybe that.
The AirPod and just use the computer's native speaker. Let's see, system purposes.
Well, I'm going to entertain a little bit of a preview of a study in Scarlet Women. So the opening scene I thought was very bold choice, and I do think reflects on your romance roots, because the opening of this whole thing, you don't know what's going on. All you know, Lady Sherlock series, you're walking in, and all you know is that a woman named Miss Holmes is gonna go have, I'm trying to use a delicate turn of phrase, an afternoon delight with a married gentleman. and uh, and it's not a great idea for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
One, mostly we get from Lord Ashburton's perspective, is that the guy she is going to be meeting is dumb as a box of hammers. He is just not.
And he's also married and has a mistress on the side, and so he's not your anybody's romantic ideal in the first place.
He's, from what we understand, he's fairly good looking, but that is really the best thing that we can say about him.
Exactly. The only thing he has to recommend him is his face.
Yes. So they get caught in the act, in the actual act, which I found actually a little shocking, which was, I mean, I was delighted that I was shocked. I was really bold, and I loved that. Because I wasn't expecting it, because you think of Sherlock Holmes and you think of some very staid, very patriarchal ideas about how these tellings should be done. And I really liked that basically her sexuality, it's a time period in which women's sexuality was a seen but not heard sort of situation, where we all put value on virginity and then we just don't talk about the rest of it. And of course, as we find out about Charlotte Holmes, Miss Holmes, the woman in question here, she does this on purpose. It doesn't go to plan, but she does it on purpose. Yeah, so that she can get out of her father's ideas that she has to be married. And things go very poorly for her for quite a while.
Yeah, because people who are dumb as a box of hammers are dumb as a box of hammers and cannot be relied upon to help you with your scheme.
Yes. Yes,
and the smart one, of course, Lord Ingram wouldn't touch her with a 10-foot pole.
Yes, which is also lovely. I thought the sexual tension between the two of them was excellent, especially, and I really want to talk about its character without ruining any of the delightful surprises that can come along. But Charlotte strikes me as a modern reader as very much neurodiverse. She strikes me as, and I feel like you really point at it, because she also has an older sister who is nonverbal.
Right. Who is, and when Charlotte was young, everybody thought she might end up like her older sister also. But one day she started talking and she was perfectly fine. She's just, she's perfectly verbal. She just doesn't want to talk.
Yeah, doesn't have anything to say. No, so why speak? And I did appreciate being able to get into, and then there's also Olivia, who is another sister, who has a lot of doubts about herself. And I really appreciated that, especially in the beginnings of the book, that the book is really a sister's novel. It becomes a mystery and it becomes a Sherlock Holmes situation, but it really felt like the beginning, the first, like, I don't know, the first third felt very much like these are sisters who are really trying hard to look out for each other and
They are. They are.
yeah, navigating this very interesting family dynamic of not just difficult personalities and difficult things, but um, yeah, also having this neurodiversity that seems to be running in their family.
Yeah, they are pretty much. So this is a family of 4 daughters, and they are pretty much basically what your Bennett sisters would be like if their parents weren't so benign. Because say what you want about the Bennett parents, they might be have various faults, but they are like essentially not bad people. You know, what if you have 4 daughters and the parents are like both neglectful and kind of mean-spirited in some way, and they hate the fact that they have only 4 daughters, and what effect that has on a sensitive soul like Charlotte's sister Livia. Charlotte doesn't care, but Livia cares a lot. Like Charlotte is neurodivergent, but Livia suffers from a lot of what women suffer from when they live under like quite oppressed conditions, when they are when they realize that they will never live up to what society expects of them. That pressure that they carry, that inner tension, that that self-hatred in some ways. So Charlotte needs to figure out how the world works, but Livia has a burden of knowing the world very well does not exist to work for her. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like that really gives us a reason for this origin story of Sherlock Holmes more than the typical ones do, where it's just like, oh, well, he's a really smart dude. The end. And
Yeah.
that,
When I proposed, when I realized I wanted to, well, it was actually the first time I read Laurie R. King's books that I realized, wow, I would like to do something like this, something so fun and innovative and just like absorbing and interesting, that kind of draws on the mythos of the Sherlock Holmes canon while being entirely its own thing. But I didn't know what exactly I want to do with it. Fast forward a few years, I realized, oh, I want to make Sherlock Holmes a woman, because I felt that it might have been done in fan fiction, but in like mainstream publishing, that was not really done. So at first I wanted to do it in a YA format. And my YA editor said, yeah, no, mysteries don't sell well in YA. So I was like, oh, well then. I turned around and asked my adult publisher, Penguin, and said, are you guys interested? And they're like, sure, we'll take a few of those. So then once I realized I was going to write it for the adult market, I figured I might as well set it in the historical time era, because that is what I'm known for writing anyway. And fortunately, I already wrote in the 1880s and 1890s, books set in that era, so the same time as when Sherlock Holmes, the original canon books were set. And then came a question of, how is my Lady Sherlock going to be any different from a male Sherlock? And I realized the big thing was going to be like, it actually changes everything. By having her being a woman in an era when women's talent, besides homemaking and baby making, were not really appreciated, it kind of changes everything, because such things were not expected of them, and it even dismayed a large swath of the population. For example, like you mentioned earlier, the opening scene of the book was Charlotte's being, come upon. How does that word go? In flagrante delicto or in delicto flagrante? I can never remember which order they came in. But yes, she was caught in the middle of the act. But that was not, it was not an amorous affair. It was a thing that she wanted done. It was because she wanted to become a headmistress of a girls' school. She figured, she had looked around and she's like, okay, that actually pays a decent wage, and it gives you a little house you can live in, and it gives you respect, independence, give you everything. But to become that, she will need both experience and education. And she cannot have that education unless her father sponsors her to it, because ladies back then did not have the means of supporting themselves and no place to get a student loan. And her father said, okay, you go to London Seasons, you try to get yourself a husband, but if in 8 years, when you're 25, you still feel the same, then I'll sponsor you to this education. And when she turns 25, he goes back on his promise. He says, no. And so what she decided to do was she decided that if she's not a virgin anymore, she is not eligible to be anybody's wife. So she decided to get rid of her virginity, but she decided to do it not openly, in secret. She was going to get rid of virginity and then go blackmail her own father.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yes. I mean, it's not a good plan, but no, you know, she did not have a whole lot of ways of doing this either. So that's how I was just going to say, basically, like, it all goes wrong and she's ruined. But her ruination was in a way her salvation. Yeah. In that now she's finally free once she, you know, she has some scary times, but once she kind of catches her footing a little bit, she finally is able to, you know, build a career that does use her talent, does, you know, does give her a sense of agency. Yeah. I, again, don't want to ruin anything for any new readers, but I do really appreciate how deep of a characterization we get in this book of Charlotte, and how mistakes she makes, because I do feel like that's one of the other things about that can be annoying about the original canon of Sherlock Holmes, is that he's somehow infallible, that you walk into a room and he's like, oh, this is everything that we have in the catalog of this is why they did it. And I really appreciate that Charlotte is intelligent and observant, and she has all of those features, but she is not infallible. In fact, sometimes makes poor decisions because she doesn't take into account the human factor. Because she's also still young and inexperienced, right? That's another thing. Would this be ruining anything for anybody if I said, you know, she hooks up with, you know, instead of Dr. Watson, she hooks up with Mrs. Watson? And what I wanted was for her to find a mentor. Like, I wanted to differentiate, because the Watson in the original Sherlock Holmes story, other than the fact that he's Sherlock Holmes' chronicler, and Sherlock Holmes seemed to have this kind of affection for him that one would reserve for, like, a, you know, occasionally well-behaved dog, you know, you really can't see what purpose Watson serves, you know, to Sherlock Holmes. But I wanted Mrs. Watson to be somebody who is really important in Charlotte's life. I want her to be like the one who teaches Charlotte how to do certain things, who brings a lot of value and experience and expertise of her own, not necessarily in the deduction, in the arena of in art of deduction, but just life experience and how to be a businesswoman and how to, you know, make your way through the world. And of course, I want Mrs. Watson to learn from Charlotte in her way. So I wanted. It is really in many ways about found family. This is a book about found family, not just your own family. Like, Charlotte remains close with her sister Olivia, but there's also, you know, they find a Mrs. Watson, the mother figure they never had. Yeah, and she is explicit about that too. That this is the mother that she wished she had. That this mother would make sense. I think Mrs. Watson is pretty much the kind of mother anybody would, nobody would mind having. Yeah. And she's also not perfect. She will fret. She will have her own ideas about what's right and what's wrong. But, you know, she's willing to listen. She's open-minded, and she wants you to be happy more than she wants herself to be right. Yeah. Yes. That is a really, that is a really good foil almost for Charlotte's birth mother.
Yeah. So to kind of rope back in here about the real world here, I am kind of curious because I think as any author, we have our ego that sometimes gets in the way. And
Mhm.
so I'm curious, how do you feel about writing Sherlock Holmes when there are so many other people who are also taking on this exact same framework? And I mean, do you ever read stuff and be like, "Oh, that's I don't like that at all." Or do you have any, like, emotional reactions to other people's
Um,
Sherlock Holmes
No,
takes?
I don't really. I haven't read a whole lot of. I mean, other than Laurie R. King, I haven't. I probably should read some more the recent Sherlock Holmes takes, but I have read some. But what strikes me instantly is that they're all so different. Like a
Mm,
lot of them are really good, and they're really good in very very different ways. So it's not as if um so it's not as if I'm looking at anybody who's doing exactly the same thing I am and going like, oh, they're doing it better than me or they're doing worse than me. No, they're all doing their own thing, because this is a marvelous thing about retelling. Everybody comes to retelling and they have their own vision. I believe Robin, who's the author's name who writes a lot of fairy tale retellings? Um,
yeah, I know who you're talking about.
McKinley, Robin McKinley. Is that
Yes,
something?
yes, it is
Yeah,
Robin
I
McKin.
believe Robin McKinley published two different Sleeping Beauty retellings, like just by herself. You know,
Yeah, and they were, like, 30 years apart, which was fantastic, so you get to see this
right?
different
So it's like there are. I think people love stories, and people also realize there are no like real new stories under the sun. There are only new ways of telling the same old stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Jonathan here from UK. Have you read any of Nancy Springer's YA Enola Holmes books?
I actually have not read them, but I have seen the first movie on Netflix.
I did too. I watched that too. I haven't seen the second one yet, though.
Me neither. Yeah.
Well, you talked about you do have a YA background as well. Um, I'm just going to
True.
pop those
Yes.
graphics up there. So I'm curious because is it the Heart Universe? Is that a YA?
No, the heart is a universe. It's not YA. It is, but it's my one and only work that's like has a science fiction bent. So
Oh,
it's yes, it's a science fiction romance, and it's only a novella, but I think it's quite epic in its own way. So it starts off something like, this is not a story about the life and death of universe, but it could be also, you know. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, do you have a favorite genre or way to write? Do you have a favorite child of, of all of your different writings?
um, I tend to like my one-offs a lot. I tend to like um, the books that I stuff I don't get to write very often. And so when I write them, it's usually because I want to, not because I have a contract that need to be fulfilled. So I wrote one contemporary romance that I like a lot. That's the one in my heart. I wrote one science fiction novella, romance novella. That's The Heart is the Universe. All those one-offs I really love for some reason. They just like, it's like, yes, I know nobody's dangling money in front of me and nobody's dangling anything in front of me, but I just want to work on it, and I had such pleasure working on those books. And I think there's something to be said about that, about writers occasionally taking time out from just building their careers to like recharge, to do something that's fun and make them remember why they love writing in the first place,
Yeah.
and
Well,
also
I've got
something that has no time pressure on it. You can
Yes.
work on it whenever you feel like, and not go like, no, I need to write another 4,000 words in this or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Get that. So in your books, you also won Rita Awards, and of course, these are just a couple. This is what I could fit on a page. Um,
Mhm.
So people who
That's
are
about
not
half of my book, so it's not too bad.
well, so for people who don't know, the Rita Award is a really big deal in the romance community. So how you won those in 2017? Was that when they, or did I no?
No, gosh, no, I won them a long time ago. I feel like I won them in 2010 or 2011 or 2011, 2012. It was 2 consecutive years, but it was like a decade ago. So these are old awards by now. Like I haven't written romance very seriously since like 2016, since that's when the first Lady Sherlock books came out. And so my last romance I think was published in like 2015.
Oh wow. Well, so and also with that, you have and I love this that you have those beautiful romance covers, and then you have and I'm gonna probably pronounce it wrong. The wuxi, is that how you?
Wuxia, yes, that's Chinese word for like the martial arts. Yeah, martial arts
Yeah,
epics.
it's one of those things I even saw as a meme the past couple of days, like, oh, when you're a reader and all the words that you read and you never say it out loud, and you end up mispronouncing them because you've never heard anyone actually say it out loud. But oh, sorry, I'm
Oh,
interrupting myself because of this beautiful comment. This morning, I happened to read a New York Times interview with author Lee Bardugo in which she said, "No one writes longing the way Sherry Thomas does."
Lee Bardugo is the best. Yeah, we actually have met each other briefly when we were both, because she's a YA author and I occasionally will write a YA book. So I used to occasionally also go to teen book festivals, and I've met her at one of those. And lots of, I mean, writers are also readers first and foremost, and lots of YA writers, they also love reading romance. So I do know there's some YA writers who like my historical romance, and I think Lee is one of them.
Well, I mean, even in Sherlock, even in A Study in Scarlet Women, you have that beautiful longing between we understand it from Charlotte's side, but it's also very apparent from Lord Ingram's side that there is there is this missed opportunity there that is really really quite touching and beautiful, that I really enjoy, and I feel like again it's part of that those chops that you develop when you write romance all the time. You get that emotional aspect that I feel like you can sometimes
Yeah,
miss.
sometimes I think, wow, like because the Lady Sherlock books actually have a much lighter, more fun tone than some of my romances. There's this website called All About Romance, and every year they do a polling of this year's most this, most that book, and I have won Tearjerker of the Year award on there like more than once. So
That's
which is really
wonderful.
funny because I am, I don't think I'm necessarily bubbly in personality, but I am quite, you know, like not mopey at all. Let's just put it that way, not mopey at all. Like in my daily life, I do not yearn and do not, but I really like to read that. I really love to, like, because I feel everybody has been young once and everybody has loved intensely and hard and hopeless once, and I really remember what that was like, and you know and just and that, as romance tend not to be like plot driven, so that is what pulls me in as a reader, like, oh, I really want like that punch in the chest, so I like that, I like to do that in a romance, like make it hurt really good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so do you have any hints on how to write something like that? Do you have any ideas? Like, do you have I don't, how do I even phrase this question? Do you have yeah.
I think I might have an idea. Actually, I even teach workshops on that. Basically, you just cannot be afraid of writing emotions. Like,
Mhm.
write about your characters where it hurts. Let readers know right away like what is their pain, like what
Mm,
is their where do they hurt, like Charlotte Holmes. She in book one at least, she overcomes a major problem in the sense that she didn't used to have agency over her life. She was not able to do what she wants. So in book 1, even though she she has this terrible fall from grace, and she has some like scary times following that because she has no money, and she's just basically trying not to end up on the street. But once she gets over like certain of these difficulties, her life kind of begins to kind of like get on track in a way. But her love life still sucks because she realized far too late that she's been in love with her childhood friend for a long time, and he's already married. And I think in book 5 they actually talk about it. In book 5, she says, it is from you that I learned. It's because of my feelings for you that I learned what pain is. The essential thing about being human is yearning for what we cannot have.
Mm-hmm.
That is the essential quality of being human, yearning for a ton of things like we cannot have. And she never used to yearn for what she could not have, because having agency was something she believed she could achieve. But how do you achieve like a satisfying outcome with a man who's already married? That is just like, I mean, of course, I will orchestrate that, but she does not know I will orchestrate that. So
yeah. Well, that's fantastic. So also to bring in what other people say, there was a New Yorker article a few weeks ago from talking about the guy who wrote Slow Horses. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Slow Horses. Another mystery thriller thing. He writes basically MI5 spy novels, but about the bad ones, the ones who are not very good at it. and he was never a spy. So unlike, some of the other authors out there who have these, creds as being in, former CIA or whatever. But he said that to be a writer of genre fiction is to belong to something akin to an honorable medieval guild. And I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. I don't know if you would feel like being a mystery writer or even just historical fiction, because that seems to be the unifying thing throughout all of your book. Well, not all of them. You have a couple contemporaries, but that seems to be your unifying theme, is that you are writing in historical fiction. Do you feel like there's a guild sense to it?
Well, it's harder. I mean, I don't know if it's the same for gentleman writers, for male and female writers. And also, I came out of romance. Romance is a ghetto. Romance is a ghetto in publishing. Like romance generates the most money for publishing houses and for indie publishers, probably out of all the genres, but it's the least well respected. So we don't necessarily feel that we belong to a guild. It's more like if you come out of romance, the feeling has like, and I'm not even all that particular on like respectability. I didn't start writing to be respectable. I started writing because I was like, oh, this might be a good way to make some money while staying at home without having to go out and get a corporate job. So respectability was never like my thing. But I think a lot of romance writers, they really want to be respected. And guilds presume a certain amount of respect, like
I'm laughing just because what you were saying is so true.
Yeah,
as a romance writer myself,
guilds have it good. They don't know it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and he does say, actually, in the same article, Heron also says it's the romance writers you have to look out for. Heron said, "Blood on the carpet, those people." It's true.
Yeah, because like it's very, very interesting because the romance writers, or at least the romance writers I tend to feel myself drawn to, are like such broads. They will take no shit from anyone. Like there's no like, it kind of like, to survive in that genre, to survive with that lack of respect from elsewhere, basically presumes that you really have to like have it together. You really have to be able to face it out there. And they just are like such tough women. I don't think you can find tougher women anywhere else in any other genre than these, like, they're like, romance writers are the street brawlers, you know, outside the guild.
They absolutely are, and that is the most accurate and best way I could ever
Yeah, so maybe like mystery writers belong to a more genteel like club, but I still like identify the most as a romance writer. So I'm also still kind of like I'm not saying I'm looking at it from the outside, but you know, I'm still with one foot in the street. My other foot might be like inside the mystery club. I might even be holding a cup of tea and all that, but you know.
But you got your brass knuckles in your purse. You're ready to go. I got my
brass knuckles in my other hand, and I am seriously not even one of the fighters, not even one of the brawlers. I'm much more like a person, you know. I'm much more like, you know those crowd scenes. There'll always be like a little beggar standing to the side, just watching other people fight. That's me. Yeah. like I will not take out my knife unless you come too close to me personally. If you're just like fighting, I'm just there looking. Yes.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, we were talking about this in the green room before we got started. We were talking about Twitter because if you guys are on Twitter, you can, of course, follow Sherry Thomas there. But we were talking about it because it's kind of in this weird twilight right now. And we don't know really what's happening with it, and things have changed, and algorithm has changed, and everything else. Who knows what's happening? But Twitter was usually where
who knows.
Yeah. Twitter was where I would go to see what the latest brawl was. With the
you never found me there. Yeah, I was only the spectating.
Never a dull moment. Never a dull moment. And it sounds like you got out of, the romance path before RWA sort of exploded.
Imploded, right? Yeah.
I was almost like, is it an implode or is it an explode? Because I feel like really both happened. Like it was.
Yeah. It was a supernova. It's like both at the same time. The shell blows outward while this, the whole thing like sinks down in the center.
It was
like contracts to a singularity in the center. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Something, that's going to turn into a black hole. And in some ways it kind of did. But just to get out of talking about RWA, I was also curious about the Mulan series that you have. So
I only wrote one Mulan book, so it cannot be called a series. Yeah.
Oh,
it was a standalone. Yeah.
For some reason, I had it in my head that it was a series. Why did I think that?
Because I wrote 2 other books that are also martial art epics in a sense, but that they are connected. And one is like a coming of age story, and the other is a historical romance. But they are like one big story featuring the same people, like as they grow up. Like one is a young boy in England, the other is a young girl growing up in China toward the end of the Qing dynasty. And so it's quite dramatic, and I love it a lot. Speaking of what I love a lot of, what my own work, I love that series a lot. It's called the Hard Blade series, but Mulan is something different.
Yeah, and it does look, Ballad of Mulan. So you can see that I also do this so that I have my own reference material here too. How did you feel about writing? You go from the romance, and then you go into something that has fighting in it. Like, how do you feel about the?
Oh, I love writing actions. In fact, I like to alternate between. I used to say I love alternating between like pouring tea books, in which like the most action anybody ever does is picking up a cup of and pour some tea. I love writing between pouring tea books and like action driven books. That's just like I personally really enjoy action driven stuff myself. Like whenever you hear that I actually go see a movie in theaters, it's definitely it's going to be an action movie. It's, I don't go watch like my period dramas in movies. I just go watch things blow up. So
Yeah.
I personally love action. I love things like that high octane, like, the chases, fights, and things like that. And I love martial arts. As a reader slash spectator, I don't know anything about martial art per se, but I have grown up reading martial arts epics, so I know how they should read, and I know how to write them. So whenever I can get anybody to pay me to write a martial art book, and I'm always like taking the opportunity. So this the Mulan book actually was not my idea. It fell into my lap. Turned out my editor, my agent, one day sent me an email and said, "Oh, I just had lunch with this editor, and she's looking for someone. She just moved into a house where they're doing more diverse stuff, and she's looking for somebody to write a English language adaptation of the original Ballad of Mulan." And she said, "I thought you were the perfect person." I immediately started laughing, not because of anything else, but because I was so startled, and because I had never given Mulan a thought in my whole life. Other than the fact that when I saw Mulan as a young immigrant, so when I first came to the US, I was like, "What the hell is this?" And when I saw the Disney cartoon, I was like, seriously, I thought it was one of the strangest things I've ever seen, because because one of the only few things I remember toward the end was that she hugged the emperor, and I remember in the movie theater going like, because in imperial history, you do not even get close to the emperor. If you get beyond a certain closeness without first being invited, like, you get everything chopped off your hand, your head, like there will be nothing left to help anyone with. So it was like, seeing how westernized and everything it was just like, like, what is it? But other than that, it was like, 30 years ago, and I had no particular feelings about it in this day and age. But they were like, "Are you interested?" And I was like, "Am I interested? I don't know." And then I suddenly thought, well, it is a book that will require some action. And if you think about it, what kind of girl would actually do this? Like, I always, like, if this came to me, if it's my aging father being drafted, I would not dress as a man to go to war. I'll be like wiping away my tears in front of the door, saying, "Father, good luck," next morning. And, I'll be helping him pack. I would not be like going myself. Just because, what am I going to do there? I'm going to just like, it'll be the stupidest thing anybody can do. If you like, so the only reason I think why any girl could conceivably do that is she would have already had some training. Like, she would have already had a fair amount of martial arts training, and maybe even some background in dressing as a man that make her think, in reasonable terms, that she can both survive a battle and also manage somehow not to let her identity slip among like a bunch of other men. So then I thought, that sounds like martial arts. And so I asked, are they interested in, like, if I add like a martial arts generational family duo to this and all those stuff? And they said yes. So I was like, I will do it. So I didn't do it for Mulan per se. I did it so I could write another martial arts epic.
Oh, that's interesting that you managed to barter that in. That's pretty great.
Yes. I
You
always, I don't hide these things from my editor. I figure like much better for them to know upfront,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do know that historically, at least in the Western world, every modern war that we know of, there has been at least a few women dressed as men participating as soldiers. This is not an uncommon thing. So yeah, it works right in there. Do you
Indeed.
feel like, do you have anything in your research that you've latched onto in historical records that you like a lot, or that you've little nuggets that are inspire you at all?
inspire me, since we're talking about Mulan, I was just, what I would find out was how little I knew about that era. Constantly, I would find out how little I knew. Like, I knew so little about that era that in the end, one day I suddenly said, "Oh my God, was Confucius even born then?" And I Googled it. Yeah, no, he was born 700 years before that. That tells you how long Chinese history was. And just because Mulan took place in like 5th century BC. I mean, no, sorry, 5th century AD. But 5th century AD was a long time ago. Usually when I start a book, before I can get into the characters, I like at least try to give them some food to eat, like research something like that. So they have something to do while I figure out who they are as people. And for the longest time, I could not give her a single thing to eat, but because everything I could possibly think that she can eat had not yet come to China for some reason, like things I'm familiar with from my own childhood. Everything I used to eat, like it's like you would go like, oh my goodness, so potato, tomato, corn, sweet potato, basically everything you take for granted in a modern diet came from the Columbian Exchange 1,000 years later. And like even one day when I thought to myself, watermelons, surely she had watermelons to eat. No, she didn't have watermelons to eat because watermelons didn't get to China until 10th century from Africa. It was like,
wow.
So basically I had to go on this, search for what is natively Chinese. What could she, as it turned out, they didn't even make tofu like the way we understand tofu yet back then. And even tea was popularized only kind of in half of China, like tea as in Camellia sinensis, those what we consider today tea leaves. So in the north of China, they just drink some herbal infusion. And then I realized, much to my shock, I was like, why is everything culinary I could find from that era refer to things as wine? I was like, Chinese don't drink wine, they drink like this hard liquor. No, it was before distillation was invented. So there actually was no hard liquor. Everything was only about 9 or 10%. It was wine. Wine was the correct term for it. It's like, oh my God.
Well, I love you go through this through food, like that you start your research.
So a lot of those things, a lot of historical research is, when you're talking about eras you're completely unfamiliar with, it's just what you don't know.
It really is.
And one thing I do remember. I do remember something about shoes, in the sense that some boots actually don't have like real bottoms. Like boots for people who ride don't have hard soles at that era.
Oh.
They're just supposed to be for people who just stay on horseback, right? They're not supposed to be expected to walk a lot. So then they're constructed differently from like regular walking shoes. It's like, like, huh.
That actually makes sense. It would probably be easier to put together if you didn't have a hard sole.
So it's like, wow, I was like, people who, I love writing in the 1880s, 1890s, because thanks to Google Books, it's so easy to research in that era. But well, and they have digitized a ton of books, people written in that era by and for themselves. So you're basically reading primary material all the time. But that far back, 1,500 years back, it's hard, it's tough. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, even some of the great things about the 1880s and 1890s is that globalization has already occurred. So you have tomatoes in Italy, you have potatoes in Ireland, you have all these things that, like you're saying, that the new world.
Like UK used to import its beef from Argentina in that era. And they would have refrigerated ships. And I mentioned this, and I had a reader writing to me saying, surely you are mistaken about that, because Freon wasn't invented until like the 1930s. I was like, yes, Freon was invented only then, but people used to be like so good at refrigeration, because they would like just cut up huge blocks of ice, in winter when the ponds or whatever, any bodies of water freeze over, and any major estate will have like a 15-foot deep ice well where they store enough ice for 2 years in case, next year's winter is like not very cold and the ponds doesn't freeze over. So yeah, they did have refrigerated ship. They just refrigerated with like gigantic chunks of ice instead of like Freon. So for the beef to arrive safely and sanitarily from Argentina to the UK. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I do feel like sort of the bonus superpower you get to have as a historical novelist is that you have a better understanding of how we got to this point today, because you have to see, oh yeah, before we had this technology, this is what we used to use, and this is what we used to use. And I do feel like you kind of get a better sense of the world in some way.
Yeah, in a way it does, because most people might not think this, but the Britain in the late Victorian era is so much the equivalent of US in this day and age, or say US at the end of the previous century or something like that. They are just like, they are the colossus that bestride the world. And everyone comes to them. The amount of material wealth and diversity, like of consumption, is basically unparalleled, the material wealth. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, and I like that you, in a study in The Women in Scarlet, you did reference a couple of, um, things that you wouldn't find in a novel of that time, but were absolutely happening. Like you do reference a homosexual relationship, and you do have these other aspects that modern readers might not blink at, but at the time they would have whitewashed their own history because they would
Oh
not want
yeah.
to have included this because it was unseemly in some way.
Right. Yeah.
But
So
you
much
do
of.
have that diversity.
Sorry.
Yep, sorry. But you do have this diversity that is happening, and these different, the neurodiversity, the um, physical diversities, the sexual diversities. You have all of these things that have always been a part of our worlds, but when you have certain eras, they don't reference it.
Right. But we are writing books for the audience of today, not for the Victorian audience. So,
exactly.
and
And
those people, the differences have always existed, right? It's just that they used to get like shoved down, forcefully swept under the rug so that everybody would look the same and be the same.
yeah, well, I'm curious. I do feel like part of the job of a historical novelist is to interpret some things for your modern reader who might not understand it, because words change over time. Terms that might be extant at that time have changed their meanings, things like that. And so I'm curious, I don't know if you have your own philosophy on how that works, or different viewpoints that you try to highlight because of it.
Um, well, for one thing, most American, to use a funny example, most American readers do not know what a plum cake is. Like, I think in my second book, I actually explained that there are no plums in a plum cake. It's got half a pound of raisins,
See, I didn't know that.
I even thought they were having like a nice, cake with fresh plum, pieces of fresh plum studded or something like that. So yeah, a lot of a lot of a lot of ideas and stuff. You do want to get across to readers that these things mattered so much more, or that they were so much more dangerous, controversial, and all that to the people back then. But you also don't want to but on the flip side, the thing is, what I hated a lot about books that were actually written in the Victorian era was like how terrible the women's fate were, for essentially like none of their fault. If you think about your Tess Duberville, your all these books with like a woman's name in the title, that
Yes.
woman almost always dies a horrible death, and alone and broke, and all that, and all because sometimes it's because she dared to reach for a little happiness. And sometimes it's even worse. Sometimes she didn't do anything. She just happened to be walking on the wrong street or something like that. Whether that is as morality tales or um, as just like what they call like portrayal of life, whatnot, it just gives us this really, really depressing view. And I think I used to think that all of Victorian era, or basically all of the past, was kind of like that, until like revolutionary enough when I read Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And because I had remembered all these other books, when I read Pride and Prejudice, I was expecting something horrible to happen to Lydia. Lydia, the third, I think the third or fourth sister in the book, not only ran away with an unmarried man, basically, for no better reason than she's just like, woohoo, she's just foolish and doesn't care. And nothing bad happened to her. I mean, the only thing bad to her was she had to marry this untrustworthy man.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
wanted to.
They seem to they get married, and they seem to be like, they live in a like not necessarily super respectable fashion, but nobody's starving, nobody's out on the street, nobody's being ostracized. She's still being received by her family, and that was just so revolutionary to me. Like, I have never seen a writer who is so kind to what's essentially a fallen woman. I was like, can that happen? I was like, surely that must be somewhat acceptable, like, because so many people read Jane Austen in her era. She was like popular in her own time. Her fame did not come just like posthumously. Like, she was popular in her own era, and like the regent supposedly was a fan and all that. So surely she wasn't just like pulling things out of her ass. I mean, to be sure, the Regency was a slightly and the Georgian era was slightly looser than the later Victorian era, but still, it just shows that there must be other ways to live than like either extremely laced, extremely straight-laced, or dead, or dying of a horrible death. There must be like somewhere in the middle where people who have made mistakes can somehow still find a way to live, and without just like paying the ultimate price all the time.
Yes.
So that's what I also want to portray for that. It's possible. It's not like everybody who makes a mistake has to just like because Mrs. Watson is a former actress, and by former actress I mean she was like fully like she did everything what you think actress did. She hooked up with rich and powerful men. She was their mistresses for a while and all that, and she was like turned out pretty well. She has she has lots of experience. She's still beautiful and she's still charming, and she has enough money to live comfortably the rest of her life. And I was like, yeah, you go, Mrs. Watson. I'm pretty sure the Mrs. Watsons of the world were there. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I gotta say, we are running to the end of our time, but one of the other things I wanted to say was that I really appreciated that Charlotte Holmes is a very feminine person. She's a very, it's commented on several times that she is not just very feminine and does that consciously, and it made a choice to be that way, but is also attractive. She's not super skinny, and she does make a point of saying, oh no, I can only be this much I can weigh, because if I weigh any more, then I have too many chins, and that's not okay. But she's
vain. She's vain. There's some vanity to our Charlotte.
Yes, but she's also I perceive her.
The in the first draft I ever wrote of the book, my Lady Sherlock kind of was essentially the female version of the 80s BBC Sherlock. Like, if you think what he looked like, she was that, except like a woman. And then I was like, this is like not fun at all. So I totally went in the other direction. And also because I think a lot of times like femininity, like, or just people being just overtly, extravagantly female is still kind of like people immediately link that to the to the fertility side of her, say, biological functions. And nobody looks at such a woman and think really, really smart. But there are a ton of very, feminine women who are like, who have minds that are sharp as surgical implements. So like the two have never been mutually exclusive.
Well, and I gotta say that again, I don't want to give too much away. Spoiler alert. But the very end of this volume, you have that Lord Ingram even says that uh, he was terrified when his brother, who at one point is a suitor of Charlotte, he says that he's afraid of him discovering her brains, because that would really clinch it. That then he would fall in love if he discovered Charlotte had brains behind all of the beauty and the big bosom. That then it would be all over. And I really,
I always think she's like super cute rather than super beautiful. But yes.
yeah, well, I mean, her ample bosom is referenced.
Her ample bosom is like what draw people's eyes first.
Men walking slowly next to her table. I could actually visualize that, where they're just sort of like, okay. I just thought that was very, very funny. And yes, I think even still people equate feminine beauty as being silly, and pursuing that as being something that's very
like
silly.
unserious when really, like, I mean, I don't personally, but seriously, you can have a lipstick collection and a collection of degrees at the same time.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive. It's
No,
fine.
they're not at all. Yeah, I have neither a collection degrees nor a collection lipsticks, so but I have friends who do. Yes,
but I don't have I have like 2 lipsticks, and this is one of them. That's it. But we are at the end of our time. But Sherry, it was so great to talk to you.
it
I
was
highly
so much fun. Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you very much. I mean, I never thought, I didn't realize today we'll be talking about romance writers as street brawlers, but I really like that.
I actually write about Regency street brawlers, so women street brawlers. That's actually literally what I do. So for me, that's like just another day. And I do want everyone to know that your latest book, A Tempest at Sea, is coming out March 14th. So you do have another one. So do you need to read them in order, or can you pick up any one of them?
It would be good to read them in order because they are like, the books are very much linked with the overarching plot. You can read them individually, and I know people do start at places on book 1, but if you can, I very much encourage you to, although I do have a friend who said she started with book 2.
Oh,
and that was fine also, because book 1 is an origin story. So a lot of times if you just skip over the origin story, but I think the origin story was like not bad. It's it kind of explains a lot about the character. But if you start from book 2, I will not stop you.
Yeah, there you go. Well, so this is book 1 up here. Woo, wrong way. Sorry, this thing is always
Scarlet Women.
Yes. And then this is the one that is coming out
this
in
is book 7. This is coming out in March. Yes.
Fantastic. So it's so great to have you. I'm going to pop you off right now, but please stay so we can chat just a little bit.
Okay, and thank you to everybody who caught the live stream. Thank you so much for your comments. And thank you, Edie. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, it was great. All right, you guys. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope everybody who catches the replay also enjoys this and also laughs as hard as I did during this. It's fantastic. And I want you to keep in mind that we have another one coming up next month. We are going to talk to author Amelie Howard, who also writes in a lot of different genres, who also writes YA. So that is fantastic. I love being able to talk about all these different genres because writing is writing, no doubt about it. So thank you guys so much. And I